My name is Marin Ashford, 30 years old. Last Saturday evening, I sat at a long table in Magnolia's Italian Bistro in downtown Greenville, the kind of place where the lights are dim enough to hide nerves but not lies. My parents were across from me, both leaning in with identical smirks. My sister Lori was sprawled beside her boyfriend Brian, phone in hand, half paying attention, as always. The clinking of glasses and soft laughter from other diners floated around us, but at our table, the air was thick with something else: expectation. My father cleared his throat like he was about to deliver a verdict. "Marin," he said, "we've decided. Tomorrow we're moving into your apartment. It's got plenty of space, and it's time you helped us out." My mother nodded, lips curling. "It's what families do," she added, as if the decision had already been signed into law. They watched me carefully, waiting for the familiar script. The older daughter would sigh, protest a little, and then fold, because that's what I'd always done. That was the role they'd written for me since I was 15. But not this time. I set down my fork and let a smile play across my lips. "That's interesting," I said, my tone calm, almost sweet. "Because I've already sold that place for $860,000. So if you're planning to move in, don't forget to bring that amount by morning." The table froze. Forks halfway to mouths, eyes wide, silence pressing against the walls. Lori dropped her phone, screen clattering against the table. Brian blinked at me like he hadn't heard right. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's face faltered, tears threatening to spring as quickly as her anger would. They didn't know. They couldn't know. I'd already made a move they'd never see coming. But to understand how I got here, to the night I put a price tag on family, you have to know what it was like growing up in the Ashford house. Our brick home in Greenville was modest, but inside it felt like two different lives crammed into one roof. I was the responsible daughter, the one expected to make do, figure things out, shoulder the weight. Lori, 2 years younger, was the chosen one, the one they poured their dreams into like water on a thirsty plant. Except she wasn't thirsty, she was entitled. Private school tuition, paid without hesitation, even when she skipped classes. European art trips every summer? Covered, because exposure is everything for creativity. At 16, she got a shiny red convertible, parked proudly in our driveway for neighbors to admire. Meanwhile, I walked to public school with a secondhand backpack stuffed with used textbooks I had paid for myself. It wasn't just favoritism, it was theft disguised as generosity. I remember one night vividly. I had spent weeks saving babysitting money, $40 in crumpled bills stuffed into an envelope under my mattress. I was planning to buy a graphing calculator for my upcoming math class. Lori barged into my room, laughing, hair still wet from her salon appointment. "Let me borrow your stash," she said, not really asking. "You'll pay me back?" I asked, clutching the envelope. She rolled her eyes. "Of course, don't be stingy." I gave in. She never returned a cent. When I confronted her weeks later, she smirked and tossed her hair. "You're so uptight, Marin. Money isn't everything." My parents overheard and told me I should be more generous as the older sister. That was the script. She demanded, I sacrificed, they applauded her spirit. The deepest cut came when I was 17. I'd earned a partial scholarship to study abroad in London, a dream I'd been chasing for years. I was ready to go, bags half packed in my mind. Then Dad's emergency surgery bill arrived, tens of thousands my parents couldn't cover. They never asked Lori to contribute, not that she could, her allowance already spent on new clothes. They turned to me. "Marin," my mother said one humid spring evening, standing in the kitchen with arms folded, "we need your scholarship funds to help cover this. You can apply again next year." It wasn't a request. It was a decision. I remember holding the acceptance letter in my hand as they spoke, the words blurring, while my chest burned. My dream vanished in one sentence. I stayed. I worked at the local grocery store instead, ringing up cans of soup for hours to help cover bills. They thanked me once. Then they went right back to praising Lori's latest painting, a half-finished canvas she abandoned in the garage. That was the night I understood. I would always be the one they leaned on, never the one they celebrated. So I stopped waiting for their approval. At school, I threw myself into studies, math and science, late nights solving equations while my classmates went to parties. I opened a secret savings account, depositing every tip, every babysitting dollar, every grocery paycheck. My plan wasn't clear yet, but it was mine. By senior year, I had enough saved to cover my first semester of college. Lori, meanwhile, barely scraped by with C's. She got a graduation party with balloons, a catered cake, and neighbors clapping as if she'd won something. I stood in the corner, smiling tightly, already planning my escape. I stopped trying to confront them. Every time I thought about it, Lori's voice echoed in my head, "Why can't you just be happy for me?" And my parents would nod as if her whims were noble causes. But resentment is fuel if you know how to burn it right. Those years built a fire in me. I wasn't going to let their favoritism define my future. Looking back now, across that dinner table in Magnolia's, I realized every slight, every sacrifice had sharpened me. They thought I was still the daughter they could lean on, but I had been building something they couldn't touch, something stronger than their control. And 860,000 was just the beginning. By the time I hit 18, escape was no longer a wish. It was survival. I enrolled at Greenville State University, a modest public school that didn't carry the glamour of Lori's private arts college. But it was mine. My partial scholarship barely covered tuition, so I picked up shifts at a diner on Main Street, waitressing until my feet throbbed. During the day, I worked part-time as an administrative assistant at a nearby hospital, filing patient charts and answering phones with a practiced smile. Most weeks, I lived on 5 hours of sleep, fueled by black coffee and stubbornness. But even through the exhaustion, there was a kind of clarity. Every paycheck, no matter how small, meant one more brick in the wall between me and my family's grip. Meanwhile, Lori posted sun-drenched photos from her liberal arts campus, wine glasses, rooftop views, Paris trips. She wasn't even passing half her classes, but her captions read like she was living a masterpiece. My parents commented on every photo with praise. "So proud of you, sweetheart." They never asked how I was managing to eat. One rainy afternoon in my sophomore year, I stumbled into a campus coffee shop between shifts. That's where I met Daniel Brooks. He was hunched over a laptop, typing furiously, a stack of computer science books spread around him. His quiet intensity matched mine, but when he looked up, there was something steady in his gaze. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," he said, sliding his coffee across the table toward me. "I haven't," I admitted, too tired to pretend otherwise. That was the start of it. Daniel wasn't flashy. He didn't talk about money or status. He told me about fixing computers in high school for extra cash, about coding side projects late at night. Self-reliance wasn't an option for him. It was the only way. Over tacos from a cheap food truck, we swapped stories about juggling jobs and classes. For the first time, I felt seen by someone who didn't expect me to perform gratitude for crumbs. By junior year, I'd found an unpaid internship at a small Greenville startup working on a healthcare app. The office was cramped, full of mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that spat out lukewarm sludge, but I loved it. I poured my savings, $2,000 scraped from diner tips, into helping test their first prototype. Nights blurred into mornings as I coded features, analyzed user data, and scribbled ideas on napkins. It wasn't glamorous, but it clicked. I wasn't just studying computer science anymore, I was shaping something real. By the time I graduated with a 3.7 GPA, my debt was lower than most, only because I'd worked myself raw. The startup offered me a full-time role. From intern to junior developer, I climbed, fueled by the same fire that had kept me awake in high school. The company grew. First 10,000 users, then a contract with a local hospital system. I earned sweat equity, small at first, but mine. At 27, I bought a modest one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. No help from anyone, just me. I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would see me differently then. At 28, I invited them to tour the startup office after we hit our first million in revenue. The team bustled around sleek monitors, the air alive with the hum of progress. My parents walked through, eyes wide, Lori trailing behind, taking selfies for her feed. "This is impressive," my father said, tapping his chin as if evaluating a case file. "You've done well." But then came the questions. "What's the valuation?" he asked too quickly. "How much are your shares worth?" my mother pressed. "You're making good money now, right? Family helps family." Lori didn't even look up from her phone. "You should share the wealth, Marin. Make life easier for all of us." I forced a smile, but inside my stomach twisted. Their words weren't about pride. They were calculations. That night, Daniel sat with me in my apartment as I replayed every comment. "They're not celebrating," I said, staring at the ceiling. "They're circling." He squeezed my hand. "Then you protect what's yours." The next month, my suspicions were confirmed. Aunt Carol, my father's older sister, sharp-tongued and perceptive, called me late one night. "Marin," she said, her voice low, "your parents are in trouble. They've racked up over $50,000 in credit card debt, all to keep Lori in that downtown loft and send her on another trip to Paris." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "They're counting on you to bail them out," Aunt Carol continued. "I overheard your father telling a neighbor, 'Marin's got that big apartment now. We can move in, save on rent, and she'll chip in more. It's only fair.'" Her words felt like a punch. I could picture it, my family arriving with boxes, filling my apartment with their noise, their demands. Not asking, expecting. I thought about Lori borrowing my babysitting money when we were teens, promising to pay it back but never doing it. About my parents shrugging, telling me to be more generous. About the London scholarship I gave up. This wasn't just about debt. They didn't see me as their daughter. They saw me as a safety net. Betrayal burned hotter than anger. I wasn't going to let them take what I had built. Not again. The next morning, I called a name I'd scribbled on a sticky note weeks earlier. Patrick Sullivan, a lawyer in Greenville, recommended by a colleague. In his tidy office, surrounded by shelves of thick legal books, I laid everything out. My startup equity, my apartment, my parents' sudden interest. Patrick adjusted his glasses, flipping through papers. "Your stake is worth just over $1 million. If you want to protect it, we need to move fast, transfer it, make it untouchable." I leaned forward, my decision already made. "Do it." He nodded. "I'll prepare the documents. Once the transfer closes, they won't be able to claim a cent. Not legally, not even with threats." I exhaled, a weight lifting for the first time in years. But part of me knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a storm I'd been preparing for all my life. Patrick worked quickly. Within a week, the papers were ready. A transfer of my entire equity stake to a venture capital fund for $860,000. The deal was clean, airtight, and timed so precisely my parents would never be able to contest it. I signed with a pen that shook in my hand, not from doubt, but from the memory of every sacrifice they'd carved out of me. This wasn't just business, it was armor. For a few days, I carried the secret alone. Daniel noticed the tension in my shoulders, the way I stared too long at my laptop screen. One night, over cartons of takeout spread across my coffee table, I broke. "They don't love me," I whispered, chopsticks slipping from my fingers. "They love what I can give them. They're waiting for me to crack so they can swoop in." Daniel leaned back, eyes steady, no judgment. "So you made sure they can't. That's not cold, Marin. That's survival." I nodded, swallowing hard. "But it feels like I'm cutting them off completely." He reached across the table, took my hand, and said the words I didn't realize I needed. "They cut you off years ago. You're just finally recognizing it." The next day at work, I met Sharon Ellis at a coffee shop. Sharon had become more than a colleague. She was sharp, ambitious, and unafraid to call things as they were. When I told her about the transfer, she arched an eyebrow, then smirked. "They'll push harder now that they know they can't touch your money," she warned. "You need to be ready for the next attack. And it won't be financial. It'll be your reputation." Her words landed heavy, but she was right. If they couldn't drain my bank account, they'd try to drain my name. I barely had time to process that before the family dinner at Magnolia's. The night played out exactly as Aunt Carol had predicted. My father announced they were moving into my apartment as if it were law, my mother backing him with the same tone she'd used when she took my London scholarship. Lori lounged with Brian, smirking as though she already had a room picked out. I'd been rehearsing my response all week, but when the moment came, I didn't need rehearsal. Calm washed over me like steel. "That's interesting," I said, setting my fork down, "because I already sold that apartment for $860,000. If you plan to move in, bring that by morning." The silence was sweeter than dessert. My father's jaw clenched, color rising in his cheeks. My mother blinked, tears already forming, though none had actually fallen. Lori dropped her phone, then scrambled to pick it up, muttering, "You're so selfish, always hoarding everything." Brian snorted. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Sitting there with your smug smile." Their words slid off me. I'd heard versions of them my whole life. But my father wasn't finished. He leaned in, voice low and dangerous. "You're turning your back on family. Everyone in Greenville will know what kind of daughter you are." There it was, the real threat. Not eviction, not legal force. Reputation. My mother clutched a napkin, dabbing her eyes. "After all we've done for you," she whispered. "The sacrifices." I almost laughed. "You mean the sacrifices I made? Like giving up London? Like working through college while you funded Lori's Paris trips? I'm done being your safety net. For a moment, my own words stunned me. Not because they weren't true, but because I'd never said them out loud before. Daniel's hand slid into mine under the table, warm and steady. Across the table, Aunt Carol gave the smallest of nods, her eyes shining with something between pride and sadness. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Lori scoffed, muttering insults under her breath. My father glared at me, as though I'd betrayed him, not the other way around. My mother kept her eyes down, playing the victim, but I caught a flash of something else in her expression. Calculation. They weren't going to stop. I knew it then. Sure enough, 2 days later, I woke to a flood of notifications. Lori had taken to Facebook and Instagram, posting a photo of herself looking teary-eyed with the caption, "My sister Marin is too greedy to help her own family. After everything, she's abandoning us when we need her most." The comments were brutal. Old classmates, neighbors from Greenville, even distant relatives weighed in. How could she turn her back on her parents? Family comes first. Each line was a jab, each notification a reminder that my sister knew exactly where to wound me. I sat on the couch, scrolling through the storm, heart pounding. My instinct was to fire back, to post every ugly truth about the debts, the favoritism, the sacrifices, but Sharon's voice echoed in my head. They'll attack your reputation. Don't give them fuel. Stay strategic. So I stayed silent, but silence didn't stop the storm. 1 week later, the attack came where it hurt most, my workplace. It was a Tuesday morning. I was mid-presentation with Rebecca, my boss, pitching our new app feature when the office door slammed open. My father's booming voice cut through the room. "Where's Marin?" he shouted, face red with fury. My mother followed, arms waving, her voice shrill. "She owes us. We deserve our share of all this. She wouldn't be here without us." The room froze. My colleagues stopped typing, eyes darting between me and the storm at the door. Rebecca's mouth parted in shock. Heat crawled up my neck. Every instinct screamed to shrink, to hide. But another instinct, the one I'd been sharpening for years, told me to stand tall. "This isn't the place," I said, voice low but steady. "You need to leave." They didn't budge. My father jabbed a finger at me. "We raised you. Everything you have is because of us. You will not shut us out." My chest tightened, but I didn't waver. "Security," I said, loud enough for the office to hear. 2 guards escorted them out as my mother screamed, "You'll regret this, Marin. Everyone will know what you've done." The humiliation burned, but underneath it, something steadier took root. They couldn't touch me. Not my money, not my home, not anymore. That afternoon, after my parents had been escorted out of the office, I locked myself in a conference room with Patrick Sullivan. The blinds were drawn, my laptop open to the documents he'd prepared weeks ago. He flipped through them again, meticulous as always, before setting them in a neat pile. "They can scream in every lobby from here to Charlotte," he said, his tone clipped but calm. "But the $860,000 transfer is airtight. They can't claw it back, not legally." I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "What about public perception?" Patrick looked up over his glasses. "You're not on trial in Greenville's court of gossip, Marin. You're building a business. Stick to that. The noise will fade." But he underestimated how sharp gossip can cut when it's sharpened by family. That night, Aunt Carol called. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd been waiting to say the words. "They've taken a second mortgage on the house, Marin, to cover more of Lori's expenses. New furniture, another trip. It's all unraveling, and they're blaming you for not stepping in." I sat on the edge of my bed, knuckles white around the phone. "So I'm the villain in their story again." "You always were," Aunt Carol said softly. "The difference is now you know it." For days, the silence from my parents was worse than their shouting. Lori's social media rants kept circulating, painting me as greedy, cold-hearted. People I hadn't spoken to in years unfriended me. Old coworkers sent awkward texts. "Saw what your sister posted. Hope you're okay." I wanted to scream back, to post every receipt, every detail of how many times I'd been bled dry. But Sharon's words echoed again. "Don't fuel it. Prove them wrong with what you build." So I blocked their numbers. My parents, Lori, even Brian. That single act felt like cutting a rope that had been tightening around my throat for decades. With that space, I poured myself into the work ahead. Sharon and I sketched out wireframes late into the night in her apartment, sticky notes plastered across the walls. Our new idea wasn't just another health tracker, it was a mental wellness upgrade, something that could quietly change how people monitored anxiety, depression, sleep. "You're free now," Sharon told me one evening, shoving a coffee into my hands. "Don't let their chaos write the rest of your story." Daniel echoed the sentiment in his own quiet way. When I came home exhausted, he had dinner waiting. When doubt gnawed at me, he reminded me of who I was. The girl who'd once worked 2 jobs just to afford textbooks, who built a future out of scraps. The storm outside raged on, but inside I was steadying. Then came the blow that told me the cycle had finally snapped. The bank foreclosed on my parents' house. I heard it not from them. They would never tell me. But from Aunt Carol, her voice heavy. "It's over, Marin. They've lost it. The house is going up for auction." For a long moment, I sat in silence, the image of that brick house flashing in my mind, the same walls that had held my sacrifices, my silence, my invisible years. Patrick reached out the next day with a plan. "You can buy it directly from the bank," he said. "Clean title. It won't be cheap, but you'd own it outright. Then you decide what comes next." The thought made my stomach twist. Owning the house I'd once escaped felt like both victory and punishment. But another part of me saw it clearly. This was how you cut a cycle clean. You don't wait for the roof to cave in. You take the keys. Within weeks, I signed the papers. The deed was mine. I drafted terms with Patrick's help. My parents could stay if they signed a contract to repay the $300,000 debt over 5 years, with interest. If they refused, eviction would follow. When the offer was delivered, their response was swift. A call from my mother, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you can control us? We don't owe you anything." "You owe me everything," I said quietly. "You just never paid." They refused to sign. The court sided with me. 30 days. That was all the time they had left in the house. Each day that ticked by, I expected a call, a message, some plea. But the silence remained. The weight of it was almost heavier than the chaos had been. Then, on the 30th day, I got the confirmation from Patrick. They were gone. I drove out that weekend, keys jangling in my hand. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Inside, it was chaos. Half-packed boxes, broken furniture, piles of old bills. My old bedroom had been turned into storage for Lori's failed ventures. Art canvases stacked against the wall. Unopened boxes of supplies bought on my parents' dime. I didn't linger. I hired a crew to clean, to paint, to erase. Weeks later, I rented it out to a young couple. When I visited to hand over the keys, I noticed toys scattered on the lawn, bicycles leaning against the porch, wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. The house finally sounded like a home, and for once it wasn't mine to carry anymore. 6 months passed like a slow exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The noise faded. Lori's posts lost traction. My parents' threats dissolved into silence, and the house on Maple Street now belonged to a couple who filled it with the sounds of children's laughter and wind chimes. In that time, my own life shifted, piece by piece, into something new. Daniel and I stood in a quiet park under the shade of oaks and exchanged vows. No elaborate reception, no showy guest list, just us. Aunt Carol smiling in the front row, Sharon clapping with unfiltered joy. The kind of ceremony that didn't need spectacle to feel whole. We moved into a 2-bedroom townhouse on the edge of Greenville. Small, but ours. Daniel assembled the furniture with stubborn determination, swearing under his breath when screws refused to fit. I painted the walls a soft gray, brushing over the blank spaces of my life with color I chose. For once, home felt like sanctuary, not a stage for someone else's demands. At work, Sharon and I poured everything into our new mental wellness app. What started as sticky notes on her wall became code, then prototypes, then beta testers. Within months, we launched. Local clinics signed on quickly, their doctors impressed with the way the app tracked sleep, mood, and stress in a way that felt both clinical and human. We hired 3 developers, kids fresh out of school, hungry and wide-eyed. Watching them reminded me of myself at 19, scribbling code on napkins between diner shifts. Only this time, I was the one giving them a chance. The first profits came faster than expected. Sharon burst into my apartment one evening, waving a spreadsheet. "We did it," she said, half laughing, half crying. "We're in the black." I stared at the numbers, a warmth blooming in my chest. Not just money, proof. Proof that I could build, not just survive. Meanwhile, my family was unraveling. Aunt Carol kept me informed, though I never asked her to. She said Lori and Brian had split after a spectacular fight over money. He'd grown tired of footing her bills. Lori now worked as an assistant at a real estate office, trapped behind a desk she once mocked. Her social media posts had shifted from rooftop champagne to quiet selfies in break rooms. My parents weren't faring any better. The foreclosure had gutted them. They sold the family home, the same one I'd grown up in, to cover their debts. They moved into a small retirement complex on the outskirts of town, forced to live within a budget for the first time in their lives. Aunt Carol said they still muttered my name like a curse, telling anyone who'd listen that I'd abandoned them. But here's the truth. They hadn't been abandoned. They'd been cut loose. There's a difference. One rainy afternoon, Aunt Carol stopped by our townhouse with a sealed envelope. "She wanted me to give you this," she said, eyes flicking down, voice low. Inside was a letter from my mother. Not the performative sobs of her social media posts, not the sharp accusations she'd spat across dinner tables. Handwritten, hesitant. "Marin, I don't expect forgiveness. I mistook control for love. I thought raising a child meant shaping them into what I wanted, not seeing who they already were. Philip, no, Lori, was always easier to praise, easier to spoil. You scared me, because you didn't need us. I punished that instead of honoring it. Maybe one day you'll understand. Maybe not. But I see now what I cost you. I hope it isn't too late to say it." I folded the paper carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer. My chest ached. Not with forgiveness, not yet, but with something softer than anger. Pity, maybe, or the faint echo of love for a woman who never figured out how to show it. That night, Daniel hung a framed photo from our wedding on the wall. He stepped back, hammer still in hand, grinning. "Looks good here," he said. I looked at the photo, the two of us, smiling in a way I didn't know I could. No stage, no expectation, just joy. My phone buzzed with a notification. Sharon had sent over metrics. Downloads were doubling, clinics spreading word faster than we'd projected. I smiled, closed the laptop, and left the numbers for tomorrow. Because tonight, for the first time, I wasn't defined by what I'd lost. I was defined by what I'd built. Family isn't who claims you. It's who shows up. Daniel, Sharon, Aunt Carol. My team. The people who lifted me, not drained me. The scars of betrayal remain, yes, but scars are proof of healing. As I turned off the lights and let the quiet settle around me, I whispered to myself words I never believed before. I am enough, and I am free.